So we are going to be painting this really sweet little koala bear together with easy to follow steps. As you can see, we're going to be painting this really sweet koala bear that was provided to us by one of my viewers called Sherry Thomas, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but for now, as you can see, I've traced it down onto my watercolor paper and using a really simple outline. We're just going to be using a few materials today. So here you can see how I've printed it out, scribbled on the back, and just transferred it to the watercolor paper using a pencil to get that basic outline. I provide you with the outline that you can see here on the paper, and I'll tell you later on how you can have access to that. But if you would like to have the proper outline, which looks like this, which is a digital version, again, I'm going to tell you later on how you can obtain that. This one makes it really easy to trace down. So with that said, let's talk about the rest of the materials that I'm going to be using. I'm using a rough pressed watercolor paper, which is nice and grainy and gives a lot of texture, and just a few colors. We have sepia, burnt umber, neutral tint and Davies grey. You can see a few mixes that I put on the bottom here, but you can use whichever colours that you have, and my brushes are from my own set from Craftamo that I launched last year. Once again, you can use any materials that you have, and we're going to start by mixing these few colours here. Don't worry if you haven't painted before, I'm going to show you how to do this cute little koala bear with step-by-step instructions, so please don't worry if you're new to watercolour, I'm going to be with you every step of the way. So to start with, I'm mixing sepia and a little bit of neutral tint along with Davies grey. So we've got a little selection of colours here. Notice how watery those mixes are, because we want our first wash to be our kind of base layer where we're going to be building up the colours later on. It's important at this stage that the washes are really light. These are just meant to guide us and help us to put the paint in the right position. We want to get it right at this point. Notice how I'm using my number 8 round to apply Davies grey to some of the areas where I've applied that pencil line, cleaning my brush, patting it on the kitchen paper, and then using that damp brush to blend the colours through. Adding a little bit of neutral tint on the more kind of bluey grey areas of the bear, just to get that base layer in. I do have a particular method of application which makes it really easy to apply watercolour, and I have got a full video explaining how to do this in greater detail, and I'll put that on the top of your screen right now. Just to let you know, all the materials I'm using today I'm going to be putting in the description box underneath this video so that you can check them out for yourself in your own time. I know I talk a little bit fast in these videos, but I want to get everything in for you. This is a slightly longer video than usual. I wanted to really take my time with it to make sure that you got the absolute most out of this tutorial. So as I mentioned right at the beginning, this photograph was supplied to us by a lady called Sherry Thomas. Sherry won a competition that we ran on our Facebook group recently, where I asked viewers to submit their favourite photograph, explaining why they liked it and why they felt it would make a great tutorial. And I picked 4 winners. I couldn't pick one, and Sherry was one of our winners. So over on our Facebook group, we launched this competition, and like I said, this was one of the winners, and it's a joy to paint this cute little koala bear. So thank you very much to Sherry for letting us use your photograph, and I will of course credit you in the description as well, because you are the copyright owner of this gorgeous photo. So you can see me here adding a little bit of the neutral tint. So if you want to know a little bit more about our Facebook group, I will link it in the description box underneath. Please consider joining us there, because we are an amazing community. We keep a really tight ship. You can post up your finished paintings from our tutorials, from our YouTube channel here, and you can have some feedback from me, my team, and our other incredible members. We are a really fantastic group. We keep a closer eye on things. We really pride ourselves on our kind of input on the group, so do consider joining us. And if you want to sort of take your watercolour to the next level and have some feedback, it's great to see people's work, so do consider joining us there. And like I said, we do run competitions from time to time where you can have your very own painting made into a tutorial in the way that Sherry has today. So do take a look and check us out. I'll link it in the description. I've just added a layer of sepia to the branch that this little koala bear is hugging, and I'm going to do the same to the adjoining one here. So this is my number 8 brush. I'm just adding this really watery mix all over the stem, as you can see me doing, just taking care to stay within the pencil line. At this point, you'll notice how light that colour is. It's meant to be really, really pale because we are going to be building up those colours as soon as that base layer is dry. If you are enjoying this video, could I ask you to do me a favour and hit that like button that you see underneath this video? It's a way of supporting me, and it means that more people will see it, which will help my channel grow, and it would mean the world to me. Everything is now dry, and you can see me here using my blender brush. This helps merge the colours together. When watercolour dries, it can have a kind of hard edge and it does retract a little bit from the paper, so using my blender brush will help with this. I'm mixing up the same colours as before, but this time I'm using a little less water so that the colours are darker. To darken up our colours with watercolour, all we need to do is just add less water to the mix, which will enhance that colour. So this is kind of like our second wash. This will just give us a little bit more detail as we work through. I'm using my number 2 round brush, using this kind of dry brush technique and a wiggly motion to create a few of those fluffy little furry sort of wisps around this little koala bear's ears. Taking off the excess onto my watercolour paper and just kind of flicking the brush like this to create these shapes. Every week here on YouTube we create new content. Usually we do botanicals, that kind of thing, but today we're doing something different. But we do run full tutorials here every single week. If this is something that appeals to you, you may want to consider subscribing by hitting that subscription button underneath this video. And there's a little bell on the side there that if you hit that bell, you'll be notified when I upload new content, and that way you won't miss out. So here you can see me just adding plain water with my number 2 brush to the areas that I want to drop the paint into. I'm dropping in a little bit of neutral tint. This method is called wet in wet, and you can see how it gives this really kind of soft, blurry look to the watercolour painting. This is much easier to use than wet on dry, and it gives you a little bit more freedom with your paint, and you can then blend it out using the damp brush technique that I explained in the earlier video that I linked at the top of the page. Using this pattern motion to work around his eyes or her eyes, and just taking it into that existing wash with a really light motion. Using this kind of circular squiggly motion to blend that paint into the watercolour paper, leaving some of the initial wash untouched so that you can still see that lighter value underneath. Earlier on in this video, I mentioned that we give you a simple outline as well as a digital version. So the simple outline of this koala bear, along with a reference photograph that Sherry's very kindly let us use, I'll put them right at the end of this video so that you can pause the video, take a screenshot and print it out from there. This will give you access to this really simple outline, but if you did want the digital version, which you can download, I provide that to you for absolutely free. All you need to do is join our free membership level on Patreon, and you'll have the outlines for all of our tutorials delivered directly to your inbox every week. Speaking of Patreon, we do have a Patreon where we provide botanical painting tutorials once a month for our paid patrons, and you won't find them here on YouTube. They are exclusive for my patrons. They're much slower, they are much longer, and in case this interests you, let's just take a look to see what you get. Patreon, you will have access to exclusive content that you just won't find here on YouTube. Whether you're a seasoned artist or just dipping your brush into botanical watercolour, you may want to join us here on Patreon, where the magic happens. And with Patreon's new collections tab, it makes accessing the tutorials super easy. When you join us here on Patreon, we dive deep into the art of botanical watercolours, from vibrant blooms to fine detail, and I'm here to guide you every step of the way. We have 3 membership levels to suit your skill and budget, and we even have a mentorship and coaching level, so if you're serious about developing your skills, then this could be the level for you. And now you can join Patreon for free, which will give you access to all of our YouTube traceables, which will be delivered weekly to your inbox, so no more scrolling through for the images. So if you are ready to embark on a watercolour adventure, unlock exclusive content and join a community that celebrates the beauty of botanicals, hit that join button, which I will link in the description. as I said, you can join and leave at any time. It is just botanical painting, and if that's your thing and you really want to level up, then do take a look. And we even have a mentorship and coaching level. So if you're more advanced in your journey, you may want to do that, where you can have one-on-one calls with me and feedback critiques each month. So do check us out there, and I'll link it in the description box underneath this video. Okay, so pressing on, you can see I'm working wet in wet here. Again, all I'm doing is adding water to the area that I want to drop in that neutral tint, and then that will just blur into the existing wash as before, cleaning my brush, patting it dry, and then blending it out like this. And in case you're wondering why I've got that little puddle of water in the middle of my palette, quite simply, it means that I'm not flooding my brush with water and it's easier to apply the paint. Once again, using the same technique, applying the water to the area that I want to drop in that paint, picking up the neutral tint and just dropping it in with my brush. It's rather magical, isn't it, wet and wet, where you can just see that paint merge into the damp paper. I really love it. And just continuing the process on the other section, making sure that I stay out of the lighter areas so that they retain their pale and lighter values. If you are struggling with anything with your watercolor paintings, with our tutorials here on YouTube, let me know in the comments and I'll do anything I can to help you out. I always say in my tutorials, use the colors and materials that you have. If you don't have the colors that I'm using today and you have similar colors within your own set, do let me know in the comments and I'll help you out as best I can. So I'm adding a tiny bit of, this is the sepia that you saw me put into the top of the twig there. And I did feel that we needed a little bit of a darker tone to the bottom here, so I'm dropping in a little bit more of that neutral tint. So again, I'm using my blender brush to just merge those colours together where we've got that hard edge. I'm using my number 4 pointed round here. This has a really fine point. Now I know these brushes have sold out at the time of filming, but I highly recommend these brushes from Rosemary & Co. This is a red dot mini spotter and it has a fine point, and I will link it in the description box underneath in case you missed out on our brushes from Craftamo. I will link them in the description box in case we do a second run, so you can express your interest by clicking on that link. You can see me here using a pattern motion with this brush. This brush has an absolutely beautifully fine tip. So I'm using it to outline the white shiny highlight in the koala bear's eye, as you can see me doing here. Because this brush is not a very small brush, it's a number 4, it has quite a bit of oomph to it, which means that I can really control the amount of paint that I'm applying by working around those little highlights and adding the darker values where I need to. If you were lucky enough to snag these brushes, then do use your number 4. If not, like I said, I highly recommend the Rosemary & Co. Red Dot Spotters. Something like a 0 or a 2 would work just as well here, but you can see how I'm applying it to work around that negative space of that lighter colour by just using that patting motion and the tip of my brush, picking up a little bit of that sepia colour there and just dropping in. You can see that there's a kind of almost pinky brown tone underneath his or her beard there, so just dropping that in. Just adding a little bit of texture here using the kind of wiggly motion with a lighter colour of the neutral tint and just blending it through like that. Dropping in a tiny bit more of that darker value. Just adding a little bit of detail to the ears, adding some more bits of fluffy texture, adding just the neutral tint on its own. With this kind of flicky motion. Because I'm using a textured watercolor paper, it does make that a little bit easier. So just adding some sort of pulling out some hairs there with almost a dry brush technique, which means I've got very little water on the brush, but a little bit more pigment. You can always take the excess off on your kitchen towel there if you've got some to the side, or just use that flicky motion to just get rid of the excess moisture to create texture on your koala bear. Adding a tiny bit of sepia, just to give a little bit of depth of colour there, and going back to the neutral tints and adding a few darker values. Everything's dry now, so we need to start to pay a bit more attention to the tree that this cute little bear is clinging to. So again, we've got the same colours as before, burnt umber and a little bit of sepia. Once again, I'm working wet in wet, so I've added the water where I want to drop that colour in. So this is sepia. You can see I'm just using my number 2 brush to just drop in the colour, but I'm leaving a few gaps here and there to give the illusion of that tree having texture. Same on the other side. This is sepia that I'm dropping in this time, and just taking it here and there, really randomly applying the paint, working around the areas of the koala bear. So I haven't added water anywhere near his or her fur. I'm just adding it to the areas where I want to drop in on the tree. So by working wet in wet, it just means that you're applying water where you want that paint to go. You don't want to put the water anywhere else. You can see how it's just clinging to the paper where I've added the water, and using that damp brush to coax the paint into any of the pencil lines that I need to, particularly around the outside edge of the koala bear here. This is negative painting, so I'm painting around the shape of the koala bear, and the same underneath. And continuing the process, just dropping in a little bit more of a darker value where these two areas meet to create the illusion of shadow. This is my number 2 brush. If you are struggling with brushes or anything like that, let me know in the comments. As I said earlier, I'm here to help you. I want to get everybody painting, so don't feel that you can't join in. If you're not using any of the tools that I'm using here, say hi in the comments, introduce yourself, and I'll be able to help you as best I can. So carrying on the process here, just dropping in more of the 2 colours that you can see there. These are, of course, sepia and burnt umber. The sepia, the brand that I'm using today is Memory Blue, apart from the Davies Grey, which I've only used a little bit of, and the Davies Grey I've chosen is from Winsor & Newton. But any brand will do. I'm going to use my number 8 brush now to go around the second layer of the branch, and you can see I'm just dropping in water. It's actually a little bit discoloured, but I'm just dropping in a bit more of that sepia there. But still quite light, leaving gaps in between to give that illusion of there being texture on the bark. Staying out of some of that lighter colour that we applied to start with, so you can see now how it's all coming together, creating shape and form. The joy of watercolour is, of course, that we add layer after layer, and by starting off with a really light colour, it means that our watercolour painting isn't overworked and our layers will stay in place. That is key to a good watercolour painting, is starting off really, really light, sometimes, often, lighter than we think that we're going to need it, so that we can get a really good solid colour to work from. So we've done the hard work now, and we can start to have fun building up our layers. I'm going to mix exactly the same colours as I did at the start, only this time with less water. So we have sepia, burnt umber, Davies Grey, neutral tint. Using my number 2 brush, I'm just adding a tiny bit of sepia there with a lot of water around the eye and a tiny bit around the beard here, and blending it in as before. Going back to the neutral tint, I'm using my number 2 brush to add a bit of detail around the beard, and again using that sort of flicky motion to get these areas of texture in the paper. We want these lines to look soft and blurry, so I'm just using a dabbing and flicky motion to build up some of the darker colours in his or her face, blending them in as before. Working around the nose, patting around, By using a patting motion, as you can see me doing, it means I have better control. If I were to try and draw that in one go, I wouldn't be able to have as much control. So because the paper is textured, by adding these little patty motions, it means that I've got better control of my paint. Working around that little very, very small highlight in the middle of the eye, and again feeling that the top of the koala bear needed a bit of a darker colour, so we're going back in with neutral tint and blending it through. Remember that you can pause this video at any time and come back to it. You can even slow it down if you feel I'm talking a little bit too fast for you. I know I talk very, very fast in my videos. It's because I'm trying to keep up with myself, and also I do want you to have the best value that you can. So I want to get everything in there. But if you do find that I'm talking a bit too fast, you can slow down that video. I might sound a bit strange, but that's okay. So coming back down, we're adding the neutral tint. So we're adding a tiny bit of burnt umber and sepia, going over some of the darker areas, keeping out of the lighter colour that we painted in earlier on. Working around that negative shape to create the outline of the branch that the koala bear is hanging onto, and again just using that kind of flicky, wiggly motion to create texture within the bark. Going in between these areas here, adding a little slightly darker colour. I'm going to add a tiny bit of the sepia there, so just working down, and again wiggly motions to create the illusion of there being texture on that bark, which of course there is. So remember to stay right until the end of this video, where I will give you the simple pencil outline if you'd rather do it that way, and of course the access to the photograph that you can see on screen throughout this tutorial. That's very kindly been provided by our competition winner, Sherry Thomas, and again congratulations on winning one of. We've got 3 more winners which will be coming up later on this year. Not sure when at the moment. I'll put it into my schedule, and of course I'll let you all know as and when, but we've got different subjects coming up, and I promise you they're going to be interesting. So thank you to everybody that entered that competition. It was an absolute delight to see all your lovely photographs, and I haven't painted a koala bear before, and this one really kind of jumped out at me. I think it's such a pretty subject to paint, and because we hadn't done it, I thought, what a cool thing to do and join in with. It's such fun to paint something different, because I'm usually botanical and flowers and fruit and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really exciting for me to paint something different. I've really enjoyed painting this one for you, and I hope you do too. So take your time with it. It's a complex piece, but it's not as difficult as you might think. Just take your time, pause that video and come back to it if you need to. Break it down. The video is always going to be there. But like I said, just take your time, and if you're struggling, let me know in the comments and I'll help you out. So we're going over this other layer now, building up more of the texture in the way that we did to the adjoining branch. Very much the same way. I'm dipping in between the colours that I've got mixed. You don't need to be too fussy, you just need to vary them a little bit, adding a bit of texture as you work through in the way that I'm doing here. And I'm also outlining the areas where these 2 branches meet. I'm adding a little bit of water here and a little bit of sepia to add a darker colour. I felt that it was looking a little bit too light. I've purposely kept a limited palette for this one as well, because I know that sometimes not everybody has a whole ton of colours, but these are very sort of neutral shades as well, and it's a great way of getting used to painting with a muted tones and of course a limited palette. Once again, using my blender brush just to merge those colours together, and my rather muddy looking puddle of water in the middle there, going back to my number 4 brush, because I did feel that we needed to add a few sort of darker shades here and there. So once again, going back in wet and wet, dropping in that neutral tint and just merging those colours through where I've dropped in that colour. We need to work around their little claws, so at the moment they're looking a little bit flat. You'll notice here that that colour has blended into the bark, but it doesn't matter because we're going to be going over it a little bit later on. But notice how I'm taking the neutral tint only about halfway down their leg, because I want to keep that lighter area on the base part of that section as light as I can, because of course it's a much lighter colour on the photograph. Using my number 4 brush, patting it dry there and just blending it through. I'm going to do the same on the underside. I just wanted to join these up a little bit because I felt they were a little bit disjointed there. We're going back in with the water and then I'll add a little bit more of that neutral tint. By working wet and wet, it gives it this lovely, beautiful, soft blur that you can see. Going to do the same here. I'm patting my brush dry after each time so that I've got a damp brush and not a totally wet brush to blend those colours together. If I didn't pat my brush dry, it would mean that you get too much water on the brush and it would just make your paint bloom, which we don't want. So when you're doing the approach of wet and wet, cleaning my brush and then patting it dry after each brush stroke. Again, you'll see me doing this throughout the tutorial, dropping it in like this. This is neutral tint, working around those darker areas and just having a little think here where I'm going with my paint to go around the little claws there. Once again, a bit more of the neutral tint on the other side. Going back, neutral tint, dropping in a little bit more to the darker areas that I need to add a bit more of that darker tone. I did feel that we needed a bit more detail on the nose, so I'm just working around here. Again, this is just neutral tint, cleaning my brush, patting it dry, and then using that damp brush to go around any areas that I need to blend out. You can see how I'm wiggling that brush to create texture as I work through. Everything's completely dry and I've cleaned down my middle palette there, added some clean water, and once again I'm using my blender brush to merge those colours together because there is a slightly hard edge where those watercolours have dried. If you don't have a blender brush, you could use an eradicator from Rosemary & Co, or you can use an ordinary watercolour brush. I'm sharpening up the area around the dark of the eye there, trying to keep out of that little highlight using my number 4 brush. Just sharpening up that outside edge and going in again. This is neutral tint and I'm doing the same on the other side. I apologise if my hand is slightly in the way there, but I'm just working around the pencil line that we've drawn in at the start. So if you are interested in having that free version of the downloadable, which is makes tracing it down a lot easier. It is free to join Patreon for that level. There's no catch, you don't have to pay anything, it's completely free and you'll just have access to the downloadables that accompany our YouTube tutorials, and we've done that for a good few months now. We started it as a trial and a lot of you seem to like to have access to these that way. As a free member you won't have access to the tutorials, but you will have access to these downloadables. Going around the outside edge here and adding a bit more detail with the brush as before, just adding some sort of flicky motions with the dry brush technique. Just continuing to build up the layers. Just keep an eye on your reference photograph and have a look to see if there's anywhere that you need to add any darker colours. I've got here a white gel pen, and if you find that you lost your highlight, you could use the little gel pen to add a little dot. I've done a little bit on the eye on the left hand side there, so you can see if you do lose that highlight, it isn't the end of the world. If you've got one of these gel pens, they work really, really well. I'm using neutral tint and my number 4 brush, which is the finest point I could think of, which is a really fine point to sharpen up the claws. We want to give them a little bit more definition here. I'm using the same process throughout. So at this stage, I'm just going to continue using the same process as I've shown you throughout this entire tutorial, continuing to build up the colours, add texture and form and shape. I'm going to stop talking now. We've got a little bit to go yet, about another 10 minutes or so to go on this tutorial. So I'm going to stop talking and let you watch this video in peace, listening to some soothing music. I will show you the finished painting right at the end, as well as, of course, we'll put up the reference photograph on the simple outline I mentioned earlier on. Remember to like this video if you've enjoyed it. It really does help to support me, so give it a like, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. I don't want you to miss out on new uploads. I'll say thank you for watching now so that you can watch the rest of this without me talking, and I'll see you next week.